I think you're on mute, Allison. Sweden. Wow.
Here we go. We had to click go on stage.
Yeah.
I'm making a mistake. I see you down there. I have known. I just thought it was minimized. It's been a little bit, I guess. But yeah, we have people coming in from all over the world already telling us where they're from. What I'd love to hear out there in the chat is if you have a very, actually, if this is your first time at a Greenlight Guru event, it'd be good to see that. And also, I don't want to run a competition just yet because I don't have a prize to give away, but I'm curious who's been here the most, because last time we had somebody who they said it was their 40th event. So I'd love to see if this is your first time event or what number you're on, if you care to share. We'll get started in just a moment. It lets people trickle in, and I want to make sure we have kind of a quorum before we get too far along. All right, so we have quite a few first times. Okay. Austin, first time event. We are actually in Austin a while back. So, hey, Mike, good to see you. Always good to see you in the audience. Very cool. Right. Okay, I could stare at the chat all day, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're about a minute in. I'd say we probably have, it's let most in that they're probably going to let in. They'll still be trickling for a few minutes, but we'll go ahead and get started. So, hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Today's webinar is called FDA Disruption, Mitigating Risks in an Unstable U.S. Regulatory Environment. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'll be the moderator for today's session. Just a few housekeeping items before we dive into our presentation. So first, we invite you to actively participate. People who've been here before already know how to do that, so I'm really excited to see that. It's always exciting to see all the comments that come in. The chat, what we typically like to see there is how you to connect with fellow attendees or to just comment on what's going on in the presentation, but remember to play nice. There's another tab, the Q&A section. If you use that Q&A session, that's where you can ask questions that I will present or ask our presenters to answer directly. So even if you don't have a specific question you want to ask, go ahead and navigate to that Q&A section at some point, because you'll be able to see the other questions that are being asked and you'll be able to upvote those. So if something's relevant to you, go ahead and click that thumbs up button and we'll try to prioritize the most relevant questions to the audience. Also, we will be sending out the full recording and the presentation to all registrants after the live event. We don't actually have any slides. This is more of a conversation style webinar, but we will be sending out a follow-up email. So keep an eye on your inbox for that follow-up email. I'd like to say a few things about Greenlight Guru. At Greenlight Guru, our mission is to improve the quality of life through our work in the medical device industry, likely a shared goal of many of you here today. We host these free webinars to share valuable insights, learn from top industry experts, and to showcase our industry-leading solutions. Our software is designed to help medtech companies bring life-changing products to patients faster, more efficiently, and with less risk. Our software suite includes solutions for product development, quality management, and clinical data management, all tailored specifically for the medical device industry. You can join over 1,000 leading medical device companies that trust Greenlight Guru by visiting www.greenlightguru for your personalized demo after today's webinar. Okay, I want to get into the actual topic very quickly, but first I'd like to introduce today's co-presenters, Allison Komiyama and Michael Nilo. Dr. Allison Komiyama is a leading voice in guiding breakthrough medical technologies to market. She's a former FDA reviewer turned VP of MedTech Innovation at RQM Plus, and Allison brings deep insight into navigating complex regulatory pathways from 510Ks to PMAs and breakthrough device designations. She's known for her infectious enthusiasm for medical devices and her passion for supporting innovators, and she's a true advocate for smarter, safer healthcare solutions. Michael Nilo is a former FDA lead reviewer and the president and principal consultant at Nilo Medical Consulting Group. With over 15 years in the medical device industry, Michael brings deep expertise in FDA submissions, regulatory strategy, and clinical trial development, particularly for high-risk and combination products. His hands-on experience spans across startups, academia, and regulatory bodies, making him a trusted advisor for companies navigating complex global compliance landscapes. So whether you're tackling a PMA or strategizing for SAMD, Michael's insights are a must-hear for anyone in medtech. Allison, Michael, thank you so much for being here. Really glad to have you.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
I'll just kind of kick off the conversation with just a little bit of history. I mean, it's very recent history, but if for anyone who's joining and hasn't really been keeping up, we'll try to just maybe catch you up. So in early 2025, we saw one of the most dramatic shifts in U.S. healthcare policy in recent memory, at least for me anyway. Following the inauguration of the new administration, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was appointed Secretary of Health and Human Services. Dr. Marty Makary took the helm as FDA commissioner, and with these appointments came sweeping changes, and for the medical device community, the ripple effects have been pretty swift and significant. Just weeks after the leadership changes at the inaugural level, the FDA began issuing large-scale layoffs. It started over President's Day weekend, when nearly 10% of staff at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, and you can correct me with the numbers if you have more recent intel, but they were let go with little to no warning. Many were probationary employees, but the impact was immediate. Device review meetings were canceled. I heard from some teams, communications teams were dismantled, and morale inside the FDA took a major hit. The real shockwave came, though, recently on April 1st. Over 3,500 FDA employees received layoff notices, part of a broader reduction across the Health and Human Services, totaling 10,000 cuts. Key offices within CDRH, including those responsible for regulatory programs, education, and public communication, were essentially gutted. And some staff discovered they were laid off when their building access just didn't stopped working. The cuts were defended as a necessary restructuring, while the industry sounded alarms about review delays, compromised oversight, and long-term innovation setbacks. So even top FDA talent, that we saw some top leaders resigning in protest. So meanwhile, device sponsors are facing uncertainty with mounting questions about review timelines, MDUFA commitments, and what this all means for patients and innovation. So that's what we want to kind of dig into a little bit. What are the effects of a lot of these things? We may not talk about, we probably won't speculate about what's going to happen as far as, will there be more cutbacks, or that's not really the purpose. Our goal is to really help you as medical device innovators navigate what's going on here. So I'd like to open up with a poll, and if you want to comment, Allison and Michael, while we get these polls kicked off, feel free, and feel free to interrupt me at any point. Get verbose. I recognize that. My wife tells me. I want to go ahead and put a poll out there. If this is actually impacting you right now, so I'm going to go ahead and open a poll. If you navigate to the top right in the middle, there should be a poll section. And so you should be able to answer that poll there. But while we wait, we'll just 30 seconds. Allison or Michael, you have any comments before we get going?
Yeah, one thing that you mentioned, I know we're not going to focus on this about, trying to guess what the future holds for additional cuts or restructuring, but I think there's a lot on the table right now, including consolidating centers. And I think just this morning, a Supreme Court decision allowed the administration to cut another 16,000 probationary workers who may have been reinstated after the February cuts. So I think one thing to know for certain is uncertainty is going to be in the next couple months here. I think we are not done with the restructuring or layoffs at FDA. And so it'll be important to kind of keep, for you and your teams, to keep a finger on the pulse of what's going on. And I'm sure, Greenlight will be kind of helping with that. And hopefully Alice and I will be also helping with that, either via LinkedIn or personal communication or other avenues to kind of share what we're learning as we go.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the main things I've been seeing is, even with, we're not done yet, right? I don't think the RIFs, and there's more deadlines coming up where they're supposed to identify other groups that are supposed to be looked at more carefully. And I feel like not only is that painful, but it's also the trauma of what people have experienced at FDA, and a lot of folks who had never intended to leave. This is my life. This is the job that I want to continue protecting and promoting public health, are now looking for jobs. So we're also going to see just more people leaving the agency. And I think, as we've seen, especially in the initial Valentine's Day firings, we lost, I think, 10 of our lead reviewers on files that we had at FDA. And so we lost a week or two until they were reinstated. of review time, right? And it's not that FDA is going to lower the bar and say, well, we ran out of time, so we're just going to approve your device. It's it's as resources allow, so we may have to delay our decisions.
Yeah. And I'll just point out one of the comments from, let's see, it was Michael, actually pointed out that probationary can mean that you worked for FDA for so many years and briefly got promoted. I don't know if you want to touch on that, but
yeah, one of our
people,
friends was there for like on probationary status for over 6 years when it was at FDA. Yeah. Like it's one of the ways that they can renew your contract or have you move up. So it's not that you've just been there for less than a year.
And also CDRH is unique because of the nature of how user fees and the MDUFA organization works. Some of those promotions may turn you into a probationary employee for a period of a year at your new level. That's not actually the case for some of the other centers that they remain kind of tenured employees. So the probationary cuts will hit the device sector harder than the other sectors.
Yeah. And so the MDUFA fees, I don't know if you want to touch on that. There are some comments in the speaking about user fees. Maybe before we get too far, let's look at this poll, just to get an idea for where our audience is coming from. It looks like we have about 400, if my math's roughly, maybe 400 votes in. About half, I would guess, or maybe a third say minimal impact, but there are some who have seen impact. Looks like about 20% at least here. So out of the, yeah. So just get an idea. I don't know if you can see those.
So. Yeah, I think they're pulled. Oh, they were pulled up there.
I'll go ahead and show them again.
Allison, I don't know what your stance is here. It's recent, right? So I think it's tough to say exactly how it's going to impact timelines. But I think, it seems like the audience is on point to say, paying attention and aware, and maybe that's why you're on the call today. I know both of us have reached out and been in communication with the FDA review teams and things. At least the messaging for official submissions, so marketing applications, your 510Ks, your PMAs, de novos, I think the FDA is going to try to stay on schedule, at least for now, with their timelines. What at least we're seeing and what we're being told, when I say we, my team, I don't know if Allison's hearing the same thing, is a lot of the interactive review is going to go away. So one of the really nice things about working with the people at CDRH, who are all, brilliant and working hard, is that they often communicate with sponsors interactively to communicate questions and comments and things that will help, move the submission on time through. I think you're going to get a lot less of that because that takes time and effort from the review teams who are being cut. And I think that will likely lead to maybe not delays, but more negative decisions. If you can't answer those questions during the review, or if you are submitting something, the strategy is, we'll submit it, we'll just answer those questions during the review. That strategy you might want to reconsider that and have a more final submission ready to go, because I think that's going to be a big impact for people who have history in the device sector. You're used to that interactive review, and I don't know that that's going to continue as much.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the huge benefits of, I know a lot of our clients that will come to the U.S. first because they'll say this is a country where we can have set expectations on timelines, like the MDUFA and the PDUFA user fees are there for a reason, so that there isn't a backlog and you're not just waiting forever for a decision. The other thing is FDA has woven those pre-submissions, especially CDRH has woven those into the whole communication and conversation that you have prior to submitting your pre-market submission or even during your pre-market submission, and they're free, right? Like that was one of the things that even though it's one of the user fee it's in the user fee agreements, it's a free process that our friends in that are doing CE mark or in the EU don't have, right? It's really difficult often to get that feedback. And so historically, there's been more uncertainty elsewhere in the world, and I feel like US is catching up. I think with regard to the trigger mechanisms and some of the questions about user fees, so just maybe a little user fee 101. So there is a trigger mechanism that was in, that's part of the user fee amendments, and it's a provision in the programs like PDUFA, MDUFA, which are the medical device user fee amendments, and it's designed to really protect against FDA potentially relying too heavily on those user fee revenues. So when we submit a 510K or a PMA or a de novo, there's a user fee associated with it that comes from the industry side, and I think there's been a lot of negative or misconceptions about what those are. Like, oh well, industry is in FDA, or FDA is in industry's pocket. You're paying those fees, and how is that not a conflict of interest? And the whole point of the user fees that were originally written and designed and approved, congressionally written into law, is that it ensures that FDA spends like a designated amount of those appropriated funds before accessing user fee revenues. And if we don't hit or if the agency doesn't meet this requirement, which we're dangerously close to, and there was an article on Agency IQ that just came out that really beautifully wrote it up as well. If it doesn't meet this requirements, the whole user fee program could be jeopardized, and it could lead to issues like fee refunds and a shift back to relying solely on congressional funding, which the reason that it exists is because it was to try and get rid of the delays that people were experiencing decades ago, right? There was such a huge backlog. And so there was an agreement that, okay, if we have some user fees, then we'll be able to resource and have the appropriate folks in-house in order to get through those backlogs and keep things moving in an appropriate timeline. And I think that's terrifying to me.
Yeah, I'm going to date myself a little bit here to kind of echo some of Alice's comments there. But one of the questions in the chat was asking about prioritization of user fee related submissions versus non. And, marketing applications come with user fees in general. So those 510Ks and the PMAs. And I do think that there will be a prioritization to those and away from things like Q submissions and away from, especially from things that are high activity, low cost, like breakthrough applications. I think you're going to see a shift toward, they're going to it's going to be as resources allow it. All those free programs have big caveats in it that say as resources allow. And when you cut staff, resources won't allow. And I think one thing, the part that dates me is when I interviewed for the FDA, I actually interviewed in the old Rockville office, but started work in the White Oak office. And the stories of people, when they cleared out the Rockville offices, they found Q submissions hidden. It's back in the paper submission days. They found Q submissions that were hidden in the ceiling rafters, like above the drop ceilings, because they were basically just like, we don't have time for this. It's up there and forgotten.
Literally was in the
it was just literally just in the rafters, forgotten. I don't think we'll go the whole way back to that, but we have recent experience with this, right? During COVID, the FDA had extreme workloads due to EU emergency use authorization. Sorry if Allison and I jump into a bunch of alphabet government soup, but emergency use authorizations and Q subs we were told some of the Q submissions were, hey, we don't have time for this right now, or expect longer timelines for them. And I think we're probably, it's not done deal. I think the teams are going to be working as hard as they can not to do that. But I would expect longer or max wait times on your Q submissions. That you might have gotten lucky and had a meeting within 50 days, but the guidance says 75 days. You should expect 75 days at minimum.
Are there any safeguards that will prevent any rushed reviews or safety oversights given a reduced staffing? What are your thoughts about that? Could something get pushed through that? Yeah.
I mean, I've heard two thoughts, of like either the bar is going to get dropped, lowered, and like, okay, let's just start letting things through more easily, and maybe there's a faster review time, or things are just going to slow down because because you really need to make sure that things are either safe and effective or substantially equivalent. Like that review process still needs to be in there. And I mean, as a reminder, the pre-market notification process, which is the 510K process, used to just be a notification, right? In 1976, it used to just be like, notify us that you're planning to go to market with your device within 90 days. If we get back to you and ask questions, you got to answer them. But otherwise, just go straight to market if you don't hear from us.
Yeah.
And the letters now say you cannot do that. You have to wait for your substantial equivalence decision before you're allowed to, enter interstate commerce. But I mean, I don't see a world where we totally go back to that. I think one of the questions that I saw, is there going to be some streamlining of the review? I hope so in some regards. Like, I don't want them to lower the bar, and I don't think they're going to. Honestly, I think it's just going to be, we'll see slowdowns before that ever happens. I talked to a reviewer yesterday who said, likely their prioritization is going to be also what are the things that have a larger health impact, right? So PMAs, like those will be focused on IDEs, especially if they're going to be for clinical studies or supplements to that. But really, same thing as Nilo's heard, like breakthrough designation requests, those they're all as resources allow. And those interactive or even 10-day calls, like I could see those kind of being pulled off the letters as well. So I don't think they're going to lower the bar and they're just going to start saying, let's just let things through. That's actually but nobody should want that, because that's actually terrifying, and that people will die, right? Like you're putting some unsafe things out there.
Kind of echoing that, the FDA's mission is protecting the public health and not protecting industry. So I think, by training, if there are questions, if its questions are unclear, the FDA is kind of trained to assume the worst part and be more restrictive. So I actually think when people are busy, they could be sloppy, but that's not going to be an intentional move. I don't think there's going to be an intentional lowering of the bar to press things through. I actually think that what you might see is not necessarily a raised bar, but a slower bar, like Allison said, where, hey, we're gonna hold things up if this isn't clear, and if we're not going to spend as much time trying to figure it out on our own because the sponsor didn't do a good job of explaining it to us up front. And I think we're going to touch on it a little bit later, but I think there's going to be it's always been important, but I think companies should be placing a higher priority on good submission organization and, conveying that information well to the FDA. Sloppiness, I think, on the sponsor side is going to be penalized harder than maybe it was before, because the FDA is just going to have less time to figure it out.
I think there'll be more technical screen holds. I mean, they've already done it especially with the fraudulent test labs, right?
Yeah.
We've seen the power of them just being able to NSE things out of the gate. And so, and I think, Nilo, you had a conversation, I have had a conversation of like, what are some ways that we from industry side can help to really make those submissions easier for FDA, because now with limited time for each file, and reviewers have anywhere from 10 to 20 submissions sitting on their desk. And there doesn't seem to be a decrease right now yet of the submission numbers going in. So what are ways that we can help them? And if you want to start,
we could jump into it. I think if there's any FDA people who are listening might have laughed at the 10 to 20, because I remember in my time at Dental, and this was a long time ago before all this stuff, it was often that I'd have 30 to 45 files on my desk at a time. Because depending on the center and the kind of files you have, there's a lot more. I think Allison and I have both been working, a lot of these recommendations are evergreen. They were true before and they're true now, but they're going to be more important. Some of the feedback we're getting is just increased importance of good executive summaries, summary documents entirely for, like, when you're talking about technical characteristics of your device or technical performance testing. Really provide all the details in the appendices, but really spend time on good tables and good bullet points that summarize what you did. Honestly, there's always been a hesitance to involve your marketing team with the regulatory team, but in these instances, you might want to grab some marketing people that you can train to be like, hey, we need you to put together good marketing to the FDA so that this is summarized and can be understood easily by someone new. I think getting independent, building in time to your project plans for good publishing these activities, a good independent reviewer, because remember the FDA, while they're experts in your device type, they don't work for your company. So they haven't spent the last 10 years building this device. They're not even your consultants have been working for months building the submission. Get someone toward the end to go, hey, if I read this, this makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the last one I wanted to add here was we got some feedback from current FDA reviewers, and a few of them said the same thing. Add in what your device is not. Be explicit, because I think a lot of times, you think it's very clear when you're talking about what your device does, but an FDA reviewer who sees tons of devices in the same field may go, oh, well, this is pretty similar to something else we've just looked at, but that one said it's doing this, and they might make the assumption that yours can do that too. So be explicit about what your device does and what it also does not, and I think that'll help streamline communication with the review groups and maybe avoid some of those confusion questions that the FDA might not be able to ask via interactive review that they could have in the past.
Allison, I want to hear yours in just a moment. I wanted to highlight something you said because I thought it was a really good line, that the FDA is not here to protect they're here to protect the industry. They're here to protect the public, not the industry. You said it a whole lot better. That's a really good point. And I think that's helpful to consider, because if anyone's maybe they'll be less stringent. Remembering that mission is going to be helpful to recognize the reality of the situation. I want to hear yours, Allison. I also want to touch on, curious if you have any thoughts on tools like third-party review or PCCP, or what could potentially be helpful. But Allison, go ahead, and I'll let you. Maybe I'll buy some time for Michael to think about the tools while you come up with your practical strategies.
Yeah, I like the idea of bringing. It's funny that marketing and regulatory usually are the ones that butt heads, but I feel like if you have an independent person or party in your company that can review your pre-market submission before you send it in, I often have like a fresh pair of eyes look at any submission that's internal to our company to say, like, is this understandable to you, right? I love to include lots of pretty pictures and tables in our device descriptions, really making it very clear of what your device is, and as Nilo said, like what it's not. Because I think a lot of reviewers especially for a 510K, the sections that they're really going to focus on are the device description, understand what the heck your device is, and that substantial equivalence section, right? To really understand, okay, what are you comparing yourself to? What's your rationale to it? And then also that executive summary, which historically I haven't really put a lot of focus in. I haven't included it because eStar has done a lot of that, but now I think reviewers are like trying to really quickly open your file, understand what it is, understand the consults they need on the file, and farm it out and try and get this turned around really quickly, right? Because now they have limited time and more things on their plates. I think for the third-party review program, I wish that it was a more successful program in a whole. I think the whole premise and the purpose of that program is so noble and worthwhile, because it really is using this accredited third body group, kind of similar to what we have in notified bodies, to review, to help the company then put the file together and then submit to FDA. FDA is the downside to it, I think, oftentimes, is that FDA reviewers will look at the recommendation, but they will still go through the file, right? Like Ken Skidachik always says, like, FDAs are paid to be skeptics, right? Or like the reviewers are skeptical, and they should be, because they're there to try and protect and promote, but also, they will look at the recommendations and see if there's any other additional deficiencies. So it provide some incentive for that third-party program, and there's some amazing third-party review groups out there that are doing amazing work. And I hope that, I think there were some folks at FDA that said, hey, wouldn't it make sense if we left FDA and started our own third-party review accredited group? And I was like, just go for it. That would be amazing, right? Like, what you're looking for, what needs to go into a file, and then you're submitting it to FDA, and hopefully they would have that faster turnaround time. I think PCCPs are a similar, or predetermined change control plans are sort of a similar program that I think is very exciting. We're still in sort of the early days. I think only about 60 or so have made it through the pre-market program, but it allows companies to kind of state where their guardrails are going to be if they're going to make changes to their device and not need a new 510K and try to manage it within their own quality system. The beauty to that is that FDA is not having to review more 510Ks, right? It's supposed to reduce the burden and the amount of resources that FDA needs to put into more 510Ks just because you're making an update, let's say, to your software that doesn't impact things that would require a new 510K. So I think FDA is getting more fluent in reviewing them, and industry is getting more able to put those together and put them in front of FDA. Ultimately, I think that should help with the reduction of like the number of submissions. But as I said, it's like it's a terrible time to be firing people when everyone's getting up to speed on the PCCP process. I wanted to can I bring up one thing that I think especially there was one question about like Q subs, and I think also with the triggering of like the MDUFA goals and whatnot. One of the things that I've been doing more of recently are informational meetings, which is a type of Q sub that is not historically used very often because you don't get to really ask questions. It is a type of Q sub. You submit a small packet of your information, say, here, we'd like to come to FDA, or we'd like to present to FDA this information about our product and our timelines, and we'd like to come to FDA and do a demonstration. We would like to outline sort of what we think are regulatory pathways. It's your show, right? And you get FDA for an hour. Historically was just kind of like, well, great, you're going to show this and then FDA is going to attack you like harpies, or like I think people's perception of it was not very good. But the benefit to it, and what I've noticed, is that it helps. You're essentially buying an hour of FDA's time. Not even buying, it's free, but you're getting an hour of FDA's time. They don't need to prepare or review thoroughly or respond to questions that are sometimes terribly written. Like some people ask questions that they're like, I don't even know how to answer this. This is so hard to this is too generic. So being able to go in front of FDA, even bring your device, have them use it, have them touch it, can really decrease the time that it's going to need for them to like go through your device description, understand your product. And it can eventually benefit that the goals, right? Because for Q subs are one of those things that they have to respond within 75 days. If they really just need to rock up into the meeting and have a sit down and have a meeting with you for an hour, they can hopefully schedule that within a shorter time period. So the recent one that we had was within 30 days of submission. And it was really to get FDA up to speed on what we were about to submit. We're not here to ask any questions, but FDA, they're scientists, they're researchers, they're interested people. While they're not there to protect and promote industry, they care a lot about industry, because ultimately industry is also trying to protect and promote patients, I hope. Like that's what everyone's goal should be. So I think if you can kind of talk to your leadership in your companies and say, hey, maybe like what's the best strategy? Is it really getting FDA to feel more comfortable with our device? And maybe that could drive time down as well in the pre-market submission. And it also gives FDA an opportunity to ask questions, to have that that interaction with you, to then also maybe get that earlier 30-day Q sub, and they can log it out and it's off their queue, but it gives them that point right towards the MDUFA goals.
I had a couple comments on the Q sub and the third-party review, but then I also, Etienne, I can come back to the tools thing too. Sure. So I'm not as evolved as Allison. I have not come around to the informational meetings yet. I think some of your comments on the quicker meeting time would be great. I do think one of the feedbacks we've gotten from FDA and some of the smaller companies kind of require those meeting minutes as part of NIH grants are sometimes tied to that. So if you do have a requirement or investor need for an actual Q sub where you get feedback from the FDA, one of the things that we've been told, recently is very focused Q subs. So basically everything Allison just said about going in and being given the opportunity to do your show and tell of your device, but add in maybe one question or two questions, single topic. hey, here's everything of our device, and we want to ask 2 questions about our biocompatibility plan. And be very topic specific, very focused in those, and you'll get a lot quicker and better response in those. I think the FDA may, if you ask too many questions, they may go, hey, break this up. We don't have the resources. You're less likely to get that feedback if you kind of have single topic or single focus area Q submissions in the future. With the third-party review group, I agree with Allison. It would be great if that was kind of continued to be more established. I honestly think that that's probably, privatizing formerly government roles seems to be where the administration is moving. So I think there might be an increase in the third-party review group and maybe the acceptance of those reviews. We haven't seen it yet, but I think it's a likely outcome of some of the changes that are going on, and it's something I know we're paying attention to. And I think some of those review groups are also paying attention to try to grab some of the talent that are either being forced to leave or leaving voluntarily from the FDA due to morale and space and a shift in what they were hired to do. In terms of tools, I think some of the things we talked about in terms of submission prep are really important. We're on a Green Light Guru talk, so I think, but this is applicable, and I've said this publicly before. I do think historically, especially smaller companies have said, hey, what's the test plan we need to do to get through the FDA? And I think, and relied on the FDA to kind of guide them through, tell them what they needed to do. And that was their V&V plan, was just based on the regulatory requirements. I think my thinking is there's going to be more of a shift to really establishing good design controls before even going to the FDA, and really being able to document, this is our risk plan. This is why we're doing the testing we're doing. And it's not necessarily, hey, this is what we think the FDA wants. It's, hey, this is good for our product and it proves our requirements. Some companies already do that, but a lot of companies don't. They kind of just try to meet the low bar of the expectations of the FDA. And I think there's going to be more emphasis on tying that to your quality system and your design controls and your risk management plans. And that'll help explain that to the FDA too, of why you're doing that, so that, that feeds well into QMS systems. And, if it's well organized and well presented, I think, and, easy to digest, I think that's going to be helpful, especially with the higher risk devices where there's not necessarily a substantial equivalence pathway. So
I want to ask a little bit layered deeper, because you got me curious about that, especially with the design controls. And maybe I just want to answer a few questions because I want to level set some with the audience. There were some specific questions about PCCP, whether it's going to maintain this program. My understanding is that was in the Omnibus Bill of 23, so that's congressionally mandated at this point. So I don't think it's going away. And there's other things that may be similar cybersecurity guidance. We won't get into the details of how to do each of those, but if that's something people are interested in, let us know. We can do future webinars on the specifics of each one of those. But when you talk about the design controls, how can you give some specific tips on maybe the very best practices and the difference in what you're saying versus what previous companies have been doing? Because that sounds pretty powerful to me.
Sure. I think especially when we're looking at like E-Star or PMA, there's often like you break up your testing to, here's your biocomp and this is everything we did. But what often's missing is how does your testing plan, and maybe this is something that goes in a good executive summary, how does your testing plan align with your requirements? And that is not actually, when we look at MDR and EU submissions, you submit essentially your whole DHF for review and audit. That's not always required for FDA, and the way that they bring in submissions, that's not usually how it kind of, you submit your outputs, but you don't necessarily provide the background. And I think there's going, in that effort to be more clear about why you're doing stuff, I think it might be benefit you to have good presentation of, here's the requirements we thought were important, and here's why we thought those were important, and here's the test plan, and walking the FDA through your development process and your risk profile, I think is going to become more important because it'll answer some of the questions that typically would have been answered via interactive review. So I think, explaining your reasoning, and that is basically all design controls is, right? It's showing your work for your product development. So I think that becomes more important, and easily connecting, hey, this verification test shows that we met these requirements. This validation activity shows that we're meeting our customer user needs, and really drawing that picture nicely is going to be important. Whereas you were able to it came together that way, but it wasn't explicitly presented that way for most companies. So I don't know, Allison, if you've seen some of that too.
Yeah, I mean, for files that are predicating, you're using a de novo as a predicate or using something that has special controls, oftentimes you have more information, especially in the decision summaries, of what testing you're actually needing to submit. I think for some of the bench testing, right, the E-Star just says, do you have animal testing? Do you have bench testing? Do you have clinical testing? And you check a box and then they're like, okay, you fill it out, right? So I mean, some of the times it's very clear what testing is needed, especially if there's a device specific guidance document, or as I said, like a special control that says, here are the exact tests that we want you to run. But I think it always goes back to your risk assessment, right? And I'm always very wary of submitting what I call TMI, which is the best acronym for too much information, right? Like, I think, and one of the things that I hated at FDA when it was just a deluge of information that I was like, oh my gosh, I only needed about 25% of this for my review of your 510K, where I think some companies are like, let's just throw everything at them because maybe they'll need all of it. Or maybe I'll exhaust them and wear them down and they won't look at everything. And all it's going to do is just slow down the whole process. So I think being very specific, being very, here's what we submitted, why we submitted it. It was, again, for a 510K, it was to demonstrate substantial equivalence. If that test was necessary for you to demonstrate safety or effectiveness in, for example, in a de novo or PMA, that's when you would include it, right? There's a lot of testing that goes into device development. Not all of it is needed for FDA to review. And oftentimes we'll maybe say, here's all the testing that we've done. Here are the ones that we think are important for you to make your decision, FDA, and anything else is available upon request. Like, we have nothing to hide, but we also want to be very specific and control the narrative, because we also don't want to overwhelm the reviewer who, again, has 20, 30, 40 submissions on their plate, right? So yeah, I think it's just important to know what do I need to actually submit, and keeping it to that amount. And also, I think that's where the executive summaries are going to become very handy.
I love both of if I were to blend both of your comments, I guess in my mind, don't go too much, but Michael had also said, put some in put a lot of that information in the appendices. It's almost like maybe historically we'd put too much at the front. If you flip that pyramid and put your executive summary with all the other things, maybe providing that traceability to appendices, I think that's really good advice. Michael, you were going to say something?
Sorry.
Go ahead,
Michael.
No, go ahead, Allison.
One of the things I had a AD, assistant director at FDA, say, you know what, if you're going to submit this, and like we're ramping up to submit the 510K, and she's like, oh, can you just make sure to like give us a summary of the clinical? And I was like, absolutely. Like, I usually will have a wrapper document for every section that there's a ton of, let's say, the clinical section, we have our protocol reports, maybe there's multiple clinical studies, maybe there's a lot of bench testing, or even the biocompatibility. There's, of course, a lot of testing that you put into those various tabs within the eStar, but having one document to rule them all, and just to say, here's what you're going to read, and here's a snapshot of the results, and anything, if there were any deviations, like, don't hide anything, right? Like, if there's something that was that, if they find it, they're gonna have questions about it, be upfront, full disclosure, right? Like, try and explain maybe why there was a deviation, or why there was particulate in your extract. Those kind of things will get FDA to feel more confident that you're not trying to pull one over on them. And not that again, it's not the bar is going to be lowered, but if they find some inconsistencies, or they find something buried away in your labeling, or buried in some of your reports, all that's going to do is then have them say, great, now, if that's there, what else is in this file? Now I have to go through everything with a finer tooth comb. So I think just giving them that snapshot is also very helpful when they're looking at their smart template and moving things over and saying, okay, this is the information that they gave me. I will look at the reports, but really this is what I need for my memo so I can move on and make a decision.
Michael, did you have anything to add? Or
No, I think Allison kind of covered what I was going to talk about there. So,
okay, maybe we can just do some rapid fire questions from the audience, because James asked about any changes to the implementation of the FDA's QMSR, which is targeted for February 2nd of next year. My assumption is, having gone through ORA, but it's not going to change. But any thoughts there?
It's a topic of conversation, but I think right now it looks like it's still planning to be implemented. The draft rule is there, so there's no reason other than spite to change it at this point. Which, let's not throw that. That's
Sure.
There's been things there though, but no, I think my understanding is it's still on target for next year.
I know most of my thoughts were kind of centered around submission, but there were some questions about inspections. Anything to add or input about that?
I saw this comment from Anna in the chat. Anna, I honestly think it's actually pretty reasonable to expect less inspections, especially foreign ones. I think we've already seen with the kind of dissolving the travel agency and the travel people who did the support staff that did travel. I think a lot of the foreign inspections have already been delayed. Allison, have you heard some of that as well?
Yes and no. I think there's, I had someone reach out to me yesterday and just also mentioned that some of the inspectors appear to be going and inspecting more frequently. So they had their contract manufacturer had been inspected, and then they got last year, and then they came again, and then they provided a 483, and it was like something that the contract manufacturer wasn't really responsible for. And it was one of those moments of like, is there this also effort to be busy and also be submitting or like getting those 483 observations out there that to avoid being riffed or
almost meeting a quota and of sorts,
right? Yeah. I mean, it's that's scary because I would say for a lot of our class 1, class 2 device companies that we work with, it's been make sure the second that you register and list your facility and your device that your quality system is up to speed, that you're ready to go, because FDA could knock on your door the next day. And usually on average they're like, it took them a year, took FDA 3 years to come and do an inspection. I think depending on if they fire or if they get rid of some of these inspectors, there's going to be there's not like a huge amount of companies that are dissolving or disappearing. It's going to make things they're stretched thin a little bit more, but also are they more is there an incentive for them to also find more things or be more proactive with their inspections? I don't know. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist.
Sure.
Right?
Would you say it's fair? So Carl actually had a good question. They said something about rewriting QSIT. With fewer people, would it be fair to say that's just don't be holding your breath for that prior to QMSR and just go ahead and be ISO 1345 ready?
I mean, I think they're going to have to rewrite the QSIT for the QMSR. But I think that's actually good advice because of the harmonization. There are, most companies are familiar with 1345. There's plenty of, auditors certified to that. You can get your internal audit prior to an FDA review. If you're hitting a 13485 compliance system with a auditor who's actually there to audit you rather than just give you a nice pat on the back, sometimes you can get someone who's not as thorough. I think you're in a pretty good place, because it's close enough that any observations isn't gonna sink the ship. You might end up with a 483, but it's not going to be for gross negligence if you have that, if you've already done that work.
Okay. One of the questions was about, let me see. I'll just put this on the
I
screen
could
here. How
barely
do we handle
read them,
questions?
and then I was like, whoa, there's.
How do we handle questions?
I sorted by most upvotes. It's keeping them a little bit. Might
Oh,
help
that's a
you,
good
Allison.
idea. There we go.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So organization is more important than ever. So how do we
Yeah.
handle questions from investors regarding milestones and regulatory planning? How would you build this into a company's timeline and costs? Any thoughts there?
I've been fielding a lot of these questions, and I think even companies will ask me to talk to their board or talk to the investors directly. I mean, it comes down to uncertainty, right? Like I sometimes feel like, okay, I'm going to give you the best thoughts that I have now, and like part of it is what we're saying on this webinar here. I think FDA is going to just keep fighting and putting one foot in front of the other and trying to keep the processes moving, and that's what we've seen. I know there was one comment that there are some delays. Like we've already seen some things go past the 90-day 510K window, or there's been a few, but on a whole, I haven't seen in the immediate, impact. What's terrifying is I don't want people to say like, see, we fired all these people and everything's just like stayed normal, right? Because I think ultimately it's going to keep getting worse, right? It's like you can't keep fighting and keep pushing so hard and trying to meet all these deadlines and not break down, or something's going to break down, or people are going to say, yeah, I saw the writing on the wall and I had to get out of here from an FDA perspective. So I think from an investor standpoint, like we want there to be consistency, and I usually am telling them like, please be vocal. Like if you are in the US or if you have colleagues that are in the US, like reach out to your trade associations, right? Like one of the big AdvaMed letters that went in after the initial firings on February 14th, like I think that made a huge difference. And a lot of people called their congressional representatives. And even though it sometimes feels like you're just shouting into a void, like people need to know, or your reps need to know, and government needs to understand that like we actually need FDA, and cutting them out and firing reviewers and getting rid of the communications and the IT folks at FDA isn't going to help efficiency. What it's going to do is make it harder for people and the public health to get technologies and medicines that can save their lives. And so I think that's like, if that could be your message to people who actually can make a difference here, that's going to be very valuable. So ultimately, I'm like, keep fighting the good fight is usually what I tell everyone, especially investors. Like keep investing because we need this to keep moving forward, but it is a very uncertain time. And I think Nilo and I both joked, like instead of our cool backgrounds today, we should have had that like fire behind us, but I don't want to sound too like nihilistic. Like the world is ending. but we keep fighting one foot in front of the other. Yeah.
Go ahead, Michael.
I was gonna, I wish luckily this is recorded, but I do think what Allison just said should be repeated often to groups. And, this is the current actions, are not good for the public health, and they're not good for industry. The FDA is important. It's been shown historically. We have lots of history to show that, the market does not take care of itself when the consequences are public health, right? It makes sense for a better wrench. It doesn't make sense for a pacemaker. And so I think that there's, in terms of regarding milestones and regulatory planning, I think there is a bigger importance for internal to not let quote unquote in your internal organizations, your regulatory timelines are often the ones that get swallowed because testing takes longer, but you still have your firm deadline. You can't let that happen. Like let your regulatory teams do their work and give them the time to do it well. So that would be like on that, to answer that question, important. But to, investors regarding milestones, like everything Allison said, I just would love to just, please listen to that advice. There's going to be a need to have investment and into quality products, and hopefully, the FDA is going to keep going, but I think the exhaustion will happen. So we might not see it this year, right? It might be a 2026 impact to see where we're not hitting the milestones anymore, because it will just pile up.
I want to mention something, and then I want to ask you about that. In talking to a lot of venture capitalists in the last few weeks, as well as growth and family office, I do think that the venture capital is venturing away from some of these issues. They don't want to be the first in a Series B round. So if there's an inflection point where they're expecting that milestone to be reached through a regulatory submission, they may just be waiting. And so companies will be kind of left out to dry. So what I would recommend is a lot of those companies need to start looking at more family offices who are incentivized to help that particular healthcare vertical. People who actually have professionals in that vertical and want that area to improve. That might be worthwhile if there are those wondering about capital. Yeah. But I want to ask you, go ahead.
I was going to say that the whole ecosystem is in peril, right? Because there is the regulatory piece, but then we have NIH and we have CDC and then we have CMS, and all of these, it's not just chipping away or, while Nilo and I, FDA is near and dear to our hearts, and that's what we mostly deal with on a day in, day out basis. I think what's maybe the riskiest is if we chip away at all of these different centers and all these different parts of the health and human services programs, then investment, a lot of the NIH grants that my clients receive. My husband's a professor. He does, basic research in a neuroscience lab. And he's like, I don't know if I'll be able to maintain the postdocs and those students that I have. And so it also just weakens the feeders into these technologies, right? The tech transfer offices at the universities, the incubators and accelerators. And so I feel like we have to, not that it's, on the shoulders of all these VCs and angel investors to now, you got to help us out here because all the other funding sources are drying up. But if anything, it's this is the sad reality. People are going to keep getting sick, right? Like it's not healthcare is so important because it's endless, right? We have so many people, and I always try and emphasize that even though FDA is, protecting and promoting public health, we're all the public. Even like FDA is, industry is, we're all patients. Like we all are going to end up in the hospital, or we started in a hospital, or we're going to need a medicine, or I'm going to need some more Advil after the end of my day recently. So like all of these various things, I'm like, we really need the research and the entire ecosystem to be healthy. So I think again, just really pushing that that voice, your voice is really impactful. And I think it also has buoyed a lot of the FDA reviewers that have seen so much public outcry, and also just like people giving a damn, like people caring and saying like, actually we need FDA because without them, we don't have these timelines. We can't have this consistency. We have greater uncertainty without them. And I think that definitely makes a huge impact.
I was going to just echo some of what Allison just said. I think healthcare and public health is tied to economics. It's shown study after study after study. There's a reason why the Mayo Clinic is considered one of the best hospitals in the country, and it's because the people who go to the Mayo Clinic are often well off. And I'm here in Pittsburgh. It is a gloomy, miserable day in Pittsburgh right now. I'm not lucky enough to be down in San Diego with Allison. But the cuts to funding from NIH and things like that, the university here in Pittsburgh and public funding funds a large part of the economy here. It's going to hurt the hospital systems here. It's going to hurt the research systems here. It's going to hurt the new technology development here. And that's one of our colleagues sent us the Minnesota Star Tribune, Minneapolis Star Tribune headline today. And it's, FDA layoffs are going to delay submission timelines. And that's, for the, medical device industry is heavily concentrated in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. These impacts at FDA are going to trickle down into local economies and healthcare as well. And I think that's even more reason to be, we'll get off our soapboxes here, but you like, to be vocal and to be involved with this, because the FDA matters, and it matters across places where you might not realize. And it's important. So I think it's just, do what you can.
Yeah, you mentioned a few, and I actually wanted to ask about the lagging indicators, because Alice had mentioned something about, we don't necessarily want nothing to change from a timeline perspective. I mean, some in the industry may think that would be a good thing, but as for the general public, we don't want that. But what are some of the more lagging indicators, do you think, that could show that things are deteriorating?
I think you'll start to see maybe the number of products cleared, because that could be indicated of two things. One's just total submissions. Maybe less is going in because product development has slowed, because research has slowed, but also slowing because FDA is hurting for timelines, right? And I think I think that's going to be a key indicator. I think FDA staff numbers. I personally think, we got some good news. They kind of rescinded some of that return to the office. They're allowing some flexibility. And for people who are, they've extended some people who are not in the DC area to allow them to continue to work. That'll keep some of the staff numbers up. But I think when you intentionally shake the cage and, make people's lives, miserable, they're going to leave, and they're qualified. I saw one of the comments in the chat is, do you think this is going to reduce the clinical expertise at FDA? And I honestly think, yeah. It already has.
Yeah.
And I think, these are qualified doctors who went to med school and chose to work at the FDA out of, mission driven and the stability and flexibility of the work to work at the agency, because working at the FDA was great. There's a lot of good things about working there, but these actions take away a lot of the good things. And, the pay is not great especially if you're an MD, right? So they could walk away and go help somewhere else and keep up their mission-driven work. And I think you are going to lose some of the clinical expertise at the FDA. I think that's going to be one of the even if they don't let them go as part of the reduction in force RIF stuff, they're going to leave on their own. And that's going to be a lagging indicator. It might take 6 months for them to kind of decide that, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, and we've seen that with folks taking the fork, right? They were offered to depart early, and then there was I don't know what they stand for, like the VSIP or VERA, or the allowing people to retire earlier. And a lot of the folks who took those were the medical officers, right? They were partly and because, it seems like a good way to end my tenure at the agency, but also they're trying to keep the numbers open for people who are still there, right? Like it's almost like trying to keep the folks that are doing the lead reviews able to keep their jobs. I think some of the other canaries in the coal mine that I think we're going to see are they're going to deprioritize certain things. And we saw it, during COVID, and, they're going to say, I think for breakthrough designations, sprint discussions, those have been great when we have like a 21-day sprint discussion or feedback within 14 days. As we said earlier, it's as resources allow. And if those resources are busy doing other things or not there anymore, we won't have the turnaround time that we have on those. I think, again, I it's not all doom and gloom. I think there were the moment I was like, oh my gosh, there are times I start to spiral. Like, hey, I saw a meme that said like, hey, I'm going to go spiral. Does anyone need anything? I'm like, okay. But were there inefficiencies at FDA? Are there inefficiencies in the government? Are there inefficiencies in companies? 100%. There's so much across the board. There's always things that you can find wrong. There's things that I'm like, oh, I wish this could be better. Like, it could be so good. Does it mean like this is the right way to go about it? No. Like, I think there's, I have a lot of concerns with and I realize Nilo and we could come across as completely biased because our entire careers are wrapped up in helping medical device manufacturers get through FDA. And if there's no FDA, Nilo and I are gonna, I don't know. I've been talking about taking up face painting and balloon animals. But I think but as former FDAers, I also feel like we really believe in the mission, right? And I think a lot of companies do too. They want it's usually not. Most of my clients aren't like, well, I just decided to make this really amazing, life-changing, impactful device because it was going to make me bajillions of dollars, or no, it's because their mom died of it. It's because they've had family members, or they've known, or this was like the technology that they really cared about as part of the lab that they worked in. And so I'm like, there's so much passion out there, and like FDA is very passionate about the devices and the things that they review. I think it's just we gotta keep fighting the good fight, and also just like caring about each other. Sorry, it sounds so cheesy, but I'm
on that note, I mean that is something I've thought a little bit about. What can medical device companies do, or can they take advantage of some of the talent that's coming back into the industry?
Yeah,
I've already seen some reviewers hired, like straight out, like, yep, we. One of the reviewers just contacted me. I was like, "Yep, I'm moving to another country, and I'm going to work for a medical device manufacturer there, and I'm super excited." And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of talent pouring into the world that's also going to hopefully keep those devices and products safe. And yeah, I hope everyone has a soft landing.
Yeah, I think, Allison mentioned that we might be biased, but on it, I think we'd be biased because we know the value of the FDA, and these are our former colleagues and, friends and people we really respect. But to be perfectly honest, like, I think as there is some sort of destruction and turmoil at FDA, it becomes more important for you to have quality consultants and staff on your regulatory side. And so the people leaving the agency, companies should see that as an opportunity, because if the expertise is leaving in-house, it's going to be more important to have people who know how to like communicate with the agency and do it well, and in a way that makes it easy for them to do their job. And who better to do that than people who are currently leaving? I think it's actually, for the companies that are on the call, I think you should be paying attention to the folks leaving. Talk to your review teams, and taking a step back to that regulatory strategy. What's something Alice and I always talk about is like, what's your main thing you tell clients? And it's don't be a jerk. And especially right now, it's like, hey, be patient.
Get those shirts.
Don't be a jerk should be the background here as well. But no, I think it's especially important right now, right? If everybody has probably at some point in their lives worked for a company that's gone through layoffs, the government doesn't typically have this kind of thing. This is unprecedented at this level. And a lot of people took the job at the FDA to avoid this exact type of thing. Yes. So it's an especially demoralizing event. And so I think for those of you who've experienced layoffs and know how it can impact your company and the people who are left, recognize that that's happening at the FDA with the review teams, and probably at a higher level than even you've experienced before, because it's not part of just doing business. The government is not a business. It's, regardless of some people's thoughts about it, it's not. And so I think that that's a key thing to just kind of recognize when you're communicating with the agency.
I think that's really good. I'm scrolling through the questions, trying to find some unique ones. A lot of them are about third-party review, pre-subs, any additional suggestions you might have. Yeah, go ahead.
I saw one in here, and I wanted to comment on it. There was a couple of questions that were similar around, are the FDA going to accept rationale for biocomp testing? And I would kind of extend that to just any testing. I think this again comes into play with less staff. The ability to kind of take in and deal with rationales that are outside the box with higher pressure it's still an option. Like, don't throw it out there. These are good scientists, they're good clinicians, they understand things, but it takes time to not do things the cookie cutter way and to understand why that is. So you should be making decisions on, all right, what is the cost of that test to just do it versus not doing it and putting the rationale that might lead to a delay in the timeline or things that you're going to have to explain that could lead to an NSE decision that you have to then go do the test anyway. Like, I think there should be some increased conversation about where you might have before gone, we can explain it to the reviewer during the review cycle, that rationale. You might not have that luxury anymore, and that might not show up, by September. To Allison's point earlier, these are going to be some of the lagging things that the exhaustion will pick up. The formal policies of, hey, we don't have time for this interactive review anymore, stop doing it, will start being implemented. That might not happen till later. So, these are things to just kind of keep monitoring if you've got multiple submissions going in. But I don't think there's going to be a rule that they won't accept it. I think they'll always accept good science and good rationale, but it might be the time aspect is what you're going to run into.
What about breakthrough designation? Go ahead, Allison.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
I'm ready for breakthrough. I was going to say there was one question about the de novos and whether it was the lag in those has been due to the 10-to-1. I have heard directly from FDA that it isn't to do with the 10-to-1 rule, which is like every one rule that you breathe into life, regulation, you need to get rid of 10 of them. And because de novos essentially generate a new regulation for each granting, people have thought that maybe that was on the cutting block. There was actually just a lag. There's actually 3 that have come out since the inauguration. I think people were looking at it because there was one that was granted on the 17th, and then there was nothing for a long time. And then as of last week, there have been 3 that are now granted, or I should say in the last month. So they are coming out. I think I talked to someone at FDA and they said, expect a bolus of them coming in April. This just kind of happens that they ebb and flow. And we see that oftentimes with 510Ks as well, that there will be a huge submission push in September, oddly, because that's right when the user fees are going to be updated on October 1st. We see a lot of push at the end of the year. And so oftentimes with those submission timelines, people will then, you'll see either in of course, 90 days is 510Ks, but on average, 130 days later for 510Ks, and then also probably around 220 days for de novos, you'll see them start getting granted. So,
yeah, I think to that point, I had a client ask me the exact same question, and I think last year there was 15 de novos cleared in Q1 or granted in Q1, whereas this year there was only 1 actually, and then the other 2 have come out in the last week in April or something like that. But if you look back 2 or 3 years, it was the number, we're dealing with such low numbers that it's not a signal necessarily. It's just kind of some noise there of the ups and downs. So,
yeah.
Do you want to touch on any other things that may be impacted? NIOSH was a question about Canadian companies, or do you have any thoughts on the outside the U.S. impact?
I'm not qualified on the NIOSH, unfortunately, to comment. Yes,
it's okay.
I know you mentioned breakthrough, and I saw Allison jump, so we might want to touch on that while we still have some time.
I switched.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You start.
Go ahead.
I think breakthrough has at the agency. So I have my thoughts on it is it's resource intensive, right? The commitment to do sprint discussions and accelerated reviews and stuff like that are all resource intensive, and it's free. So if there's anything that's gonna, and all of it comes with that as resources allow. If there's anything that's gonna get cut, it's gonna be some of the regulatory benefits of the breakthrough submission. Now, I know a lot of the companies we consult for, they have no intention of actually utilizing those benefits. They just need breakthrough to help go to open up some purse strings for capital and things like that. So, but even the review process, people go in multiple times, 4 or 5 times to try to get that breakthrough through the door. I think it's going to be harder, and I think you should be really cognizant of it. Are you really getting something out of this at this point? If you're not getting the regulatory sprint that you want, which is, I think a strong possibility, weigh that against just going to market, going and working on spending the money for, the submission fees and your time on putting together a good V&V plan and making a good product and getting the submission through without the breakthrough. Allison.
100% agree. We've submitted a lot of breakthroughs. We have a lot of clients that have breakthrough. We have a lot of clients that have STEP. So that's the Safer Technologies program. We have a couple that have TAP, right, which is the Total Product Lifecycle Accelerated Program. They are great for, I would say, like, of all the clients that I have the breakthrough, I would say 3 are really like have utilized it to its fullest. And that FDA has been on board. Like, it really is that collaborative, like, okay, let's use it as this gatekeeper. Here's the next submission. Okay. Like, being very interactive. But for the most part, a lot of companies will get breakthrough and be like, cool, that's all we need. Now we're going to submit our 510K. And I'm just like, oh, God, and I know that FDA looks at that and they're just like, as Nilo said, it's just resource intensive, right? They are looking at this. They are trying to understand if you are indicated for life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating disease. They're trying to understand if you have a reasonable expectation to be more effective and not have technical success, clinical success. There's a lot packed into those breakthrough designation requests. So really think strongly on whether or not it's a good use of your time and a good use of FDA's resources and time as well, right? If I mean, a lot of companies are like, well, we're going to try. And I acknowledge that, I honor that, but really think of, is that going to, especially in the uncertainty that's coming in the months ahead, maybe look at that as, is that going to negatively impact your timeline? Maybe if we get something in sooner and kind of have the current FDA as it's, fighting and battling on, reviewing our device, maybe that's actually a benefit.
Yeah. This might be a question more for the, go ahead, Michael. Yeah.
Sorry, there was 2 comments from Leo in the chat, and I thought they were both good things to kind of just echo a little bit. FDA standards in general, and the FDA, the ability to travel and participate in standards organization meetings is already been cut and is being impacted. Leo said that FDA attended the meeting, but it was on their own dime. The participants were paying for it themselves to be in these committees just to kind of maintain, something they've been working on for years. I think not having FDA in the room for standards development and kind of corroboration is going to have a huge impact on industry, because we, as consultants and industry planning, you say, hey, we're going to run this test according to this standard because we know it will meet the FDA's requirements and it's the right way to evaluate our product. And if the FDA is not in the room to kind of confirm that and develop the standards to say, yeah, that's what we expect, then you're adding uncertainty to your review. You're going, okay, well, we thought that was the right thing to do, but now the FDA is telling us it wasn't because they couldn't be a part of that. So even more kind of, as industry professionals, we should be supporting the FDA to be able to do these types of things. And it's just a shame that they're not. So if there are ways to get, for those of you who work on FDA standards committees, if there are ways to help support FDA members to continue to participate, I think you should look into it. It's going to be important industry wide for that participation to continue. The other thing he had, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'll add on.
Yeah, the other thing was, do you think it will increase the use of the ASCA program? And I don't know if it will increase, but I think the ASCA program has been successful when we've used it as a company. I don't know if, Allison, you think it has, but for those of you who don't know, it's I actually forgot what the acronym stands for, but it's basically certified testing for things like biocompatibility, electrical safety. And if you run the test in an ASCA certified lab with an ASCA certified paperwork, when it goes to the FDA, they're kind of supposed to say, oh, cool, you checked the box, you're good. We're not going to review this. The cover letter says you did it right. And you get, you pay for it, but you get the pass through the FDA at the review end. I encourage people to use it anyway, and I think it's a good program to use given the layoffs and reduction in force and things, because it means your submission might not need that EMC expert on it. And now you can consolidate the amount of people on your submission and decrease the risk of delays. Sorry, Allison.
No, yeah, it's. What was your last point? Because I had this like really profound thing that I was going to say.
Oh, industry should be supporting the FDA staff participating in the standards conversations. And do what they can to do that.
It had something to do with the standards organization. Oh, I wanted to bring up. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wanted to bring up. There's a lot of like regulatory groups, like especially as people are leaving the agency or looking at like what's next. Like Nilo and I were part of an article that came out in Regulatory Focus from RAPS, the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, that was like, here's what life looks like on the outside and all the different career opportunities. The other thing is I'm a RAPS fellow, so I'm a FRAPS, and we had a call last week, and one of the things that was brought up is FDA has, free membership in RAPS, but a lot of these people that are getting riffed or let go, like are no longer RAPS members, and there are a lot of benefits and a lot of articles and a lot of job postings and that are really that when you have membership and you can go online and look at those things are very beneficial. So there is a hardship clause, and it started actually years ago, and also it was very valuable during the fires when people in the California fires, which impacted a lot of my friends, that you can apply for a membership and they will review it and often, I think, waive or greatly reduce the fees to be part of that as well. So anyway, just some things to keep in mind. Like there are resources out there for people that are looking into, what's next and how can we help?
Awesome. Well, listen, I know we're not going to be able to get to all of the questions. I don't even know how many are left, but just to be cognizant of the time, I know a lot of us have meetings at the top of the half hour, so I'm going to go ahead and call it at this moment. But I really appreciate all of you sharing your knowledge, your industry knowledge. Allison and Michael, thank you so much for the chat. Those of you listening, you've been really participative, and we'll go ahead and forward those questions on to Allison and Michael, but be patient, and they may not get to all of them. There's a lot. Maybe we can do a follow-up. Someone suggested maybe we do a follow-up in July or something when things are potentially more settled. We'll see. But I want to appreciate, just extend that. I also want to go ahead and launch a survey as well, just to get your thoughts on how you felt about this session and what you'd like to see in the future. So I'm going to start that. And but until then, until next time, we'll see you all. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Etienne.